Morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. Very welcome to join us this morning, wherever you're watching us around the world. Welcome to the Breakfast Show on Sky. Fresh evidence of attacks on Kiev this morning and an extraordinary act of defiance from an employee of Russian state TV. Very, very brave woman. See what she did coming up in just a moment. We'll also talk to the Foreign Office Minister, James Cleverly, shortly and get his view on how long President Putin can carry on. Plus, we'll speak to the former Foreign Secretary Jack Straw and Labour's Lisa Nandy. We'll also hopefully speak to Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister. And then at 9:30, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK will be here sitting on this sofa. It's a packed show. It's Tuesday, the 15th of March. More explosions heard in Kiev just before sunrise as fighting continues too in the east of the country. These are live images from Kiev. We're hearing a series of Russian strikes hit a residential neighborhood. At least one person has been killed. Hitting back, Ukrainian military releases this image of them striking a Russian tank. As President Zelenskyy says, progress in peace talks has been pretty good.
Российский премьер подчеркнул, надо усилить сотрудничество в рамках союзного государства.
They're lying to you. The Russian state TV employee arrested after interrupting a live broadcast in protest against the war.
And a very good morning from South Ukraine, the port of Odessa. Ceasefire negotiations continue today, but this place is thought to be Russia's next target.
As Roman Abramovich is spotted at an airport in Israel, reports he may now have flown to Moscow as the UK fast-tracks new laws to sanction more oligarchs. Calls for a fracking U-turn. Will speak to the boss of Quadrilla as the Prime Minister says dependence on Russian oil and gas has left us open to blackmail from Putin. MPs have criticised him turning to Saudi.
Can I press the Minister? Does she not see any contradiction between rightly ending dependence on Putin's Russia for fossil fuels, but then seeking to replace them by going cap in hand to another murderous tyrant?
Also on the programme for you this morning, trying to escape, we'll speak to a British man struggling to get his young daughter and his ex-partner out of Moldova and into the UK. And raising a bow to Ukraine, we'll speak to a Ukrainian and a British violinist who performed with almost 100 other musicians in a symphony of solidarity. Hello, everyone. Ukraine's president says progress in peace talks has been pretty good, but overnight there's reported evidence of explosions in 2 Ukrainian cities and a Russian strike that's hit a residential neighbourhood in Kiev. Here's what happened overnight. Russian forces have continued shelling suburbs around the capital Kiev with loud blasts heard before sunrise. Explosions and gunfire were also heard overnight in Kyiv in the northeast of the country. These are the live images coming to us here at Sky Centre from Kiev this morning. A smoking residential building. A Russian strike hitting that neighbourhood this morning around 18 miles from the city centre. At least one person has been killed. Others are thought to be possibly trapped inside that smouldering building. The Ukraine military say they were artillery strikes. Let's bring you the key developments this morning, should we? President Zelenskyy has described progress in peace talks with Russia as pretty good. The UK is set to sanction more oligarchs today as new laws to tackle dirty Russian money are fast-tracked through Parliament. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says the West made a terrible mistake by continuing to rely on Russian oil and gas after it invaded Crimea in 2014. And it's left us open to blackmail from Putin. The Prime Minister heading to Saudi Arabia this evening to explore other oil options. And more than 43,000 people have so far signed up to take in Ukrainians under the government's Homes for Refugees scheme in the UK, as Martha Kellner reports.
Even as Ukraine's leader hailed progress in peace talks, Russia's warplanes continued a relentless bombardment across the country. The second city of Kyiv coming under heavy fire last night. There is a crackdown on opponents of this war in Russia, but from the bleakness came this breathtaking act of bravery. In a country where denouncing the invasion of Ukraine is now a crime, this employee interrupting one of Russia's most watched news programmes. It's propaganda, the sign reads. They are lying to you here. Stop the war, she chants, as the anchor tries to drown her out. Marina Ovsyankova was arrested shortly afterwards, but she had pre-recorded this message.
К сожалению, последние годы я работала на Первом канале, занимаясь кремлевской пропагандой. И мне сейчас очень стыдно за это. Стыдно за то, что позволяла говорить ложь с экрана телевизора. Стыдно за то, что позволяла зомбировать русских людей.
It was a glimpse of opposition to this war within Russia, even if much of it has been scared into silence. Horror at the relentless bombardment of their Ukrainian neighbours. On the outskirts of Kyiv, new strikes have wrought fresh devastation. Residents of this ruined apartment block picking through the wreckage of their lives. President Zelenskyy said talks between Ukraine and Russia would resume today, as he made a direct plea to Russian soldiers.
You will take lives. There are a lot of you, but your life will also be taken. But why should you die? What for? I know that you want to survive. We intercept your conversations. We hear what you really think about this senseless war, about this disgrace, and about your state.
The fragile diplomatic hope remains. But as this war enters its 20th day, the suffering of the Ukrainian people multiplies. It's difficult to compute loss on this scale. Martha Kalner, Sky News.
Well, the Foreign Office Minister James Cleverly joining us now. Mr. Cleverly, good morning to you. Let's just start with the NATO base that we heard about over the last couple of days. Reports in this morning's newspapers that up to 3 former military personnel have died in that explosion. Do we know anything more about that?
Well, I don't have details on the individuals that have been injured and hurt or whether or not they're British nationals. Obviously, if there are British nationals involved, the UK Foreign Office will be there to support. We do remind people that the travel advice is that they shouldn't be going to Ukraine. We completely understand the urge to help and be supportive, but obviously we are telling people it is not safe to travel to Ukraine. But obviously, if British nationals have been hurt or killed, the government is there to support.
But the government can't confirm this morning whether or not British nationals have perished.
No, indeed, I can't speak about those details. I don't have that detail at the moment. But as I say, the UK government is there to support people if they do need our help. But we do urge people, whether they're tempted to help militarily or whether they are trying to be supportive in a humanitarian sense, our advice is that people should not be going to Ukraine, that there are other ways that they can help, and we advise them to donate to a recognised charity rather than putting themselves at risk.
OK, explosions in Kiev again overnight. It looks as though another residential building has been hit. It looks as though the Russians are getting quite desperate. Hitting buildings like this, just to clarify, we do it every day. That's a war crime, is it?
Yes, so the targeting of civilians or civilian infrastructure is a war crime. The situation in Ukraine is terrible, and it's obvious that the Russian military are not achieving the goals that they set themselves. They're not achieving the goals that Vladimir Putin has set for them. The defence by the Ukrainians is amazing, and we continue to support, whether it be through humanitarian support, economic support, and those defensive military equipments that we have provided the Ukrainian armed forces.
To that end, a close aide to President Putin, Viktor Zolotov, says that progress is slower than expected. Surprising that someone close to Putin would actually acknowledge that. We also believe that Russia is asking for Chinese aid. That has been denied by China. What's Britain's advice to China? We've heard what the United States has said. They've warned China against getting involved.
Well, what we're saying to all countries is that they should denounce this unprovoked, illegal attack into Ukraine by Russia. They should not in any way be supporting Russia. And we urge countries to join the UK and the international community in condemning and sanctioning Russia to choke off the finances which are funding Putin's war effort. There is no justification at all for this attack. And we urge China and all countries around the world to denounce it and absolutely not to support it.
Of course, you're a Foreign Office Minister. Have we told China that? Have we told them to butt out of this war?
Well, we have made it clear to all countries around the world that they should condemn this action. We saw at the United Nations an unprecedented scale in that vote at the General Assembly against the actions that Russia have taken. We are seeing every day more countries joining the countries that are sanctioning Russian individuals, Vladimir Putin and the people around him. And what we do is we're urging everybody to make it very, very clear that they oppose this invasion, that they will take action, that they will sanction Putin and those people around him, and they will prevent him from pursuing this, as I say, this completely unjustified war against Ukraine.
And has China done that? Have they given us that guarantee?
Well, I mean, China's statements are in the public domain. We feel that countries should be really unequivocal in their opposition to what's going on. They should condemn. A lot of countries did so at the United Nations. We would like everybody to continue pushing Russia. As you said in your introduction, we're introducing now, or rather just last night, legislation was passed which enables us to apply even more sanctions on top of the ones that we've already applied. And what we want to do is have the international community speak with one voice, condemning this attack, putting real financial pressure onto Vladimir Putin so that he can no longer pursue this war of aggression against
and I do want to talk to you about oligarchs in a second, but I just want to clarify, copper bottom it. Has China guaranteed to the UK that they will not get involved in the war in Ukraine?
Well, we haven't had that statement from China, but what we are looking to do is ensure that China and indeed every other country around the world is condemning Russia's actions, absolutely not supporting Russia in its aggression against Ukraine, and indeed sanctioning Russia and putting real financial pressure on Russia. That's what we're calling on the international community to do, and that's what we will continue to push for until this war comes to a conclusion, the Russian forces leave Ukraine.
There's a briefing that the Ministry of Defence puts out every morning about this time, an intelligence update, as they call it. I just want to share it with our viewers, and I'm interested to hear your view on this, and particularly the second point about reports suggesting that Russia may seek to stage a referendum in Kherson in an attempt to legitimise the area as a breakaway republic, similar to Donetsk. What's your interpretation of what that means?
Well, it's quite clear that Vladimir Putin's original intention was to have a kind of a lightning war, a very fast war to capture Ukraine, take Kyiv, and install a puppet government. That is clearly not working. They are failing in those military aims. So it's now quite obvious that that Vladimir Putin and the Russian military are attempting some form of legitimacy or justification for their military actions. The UK is completely clear. Ukraine is a sovereign territory. They have a right to protect their own borders. They, a faux election to try and justify Russia's aggression to Ukraine will be recognised for exactly what it is, and that is a fake. And what we are calling upon Russia to do, what we're calling on Putin to do, is to end this war and end it immediately.
OK. Fact-finding mission continuing. There's so much to talk to you about this morning. I'll crack on. Article in the Telegraph this morning from the Prime Minister, in which he talks about solar, he talks about wind, he talks about nuclear, he talks about North Sea oil. Doesn't mention fracking. Are we giving up on fracking?
Well, we have made it absolutely clear that we need to move away from our collective addiction to hydrocarbon energy. The UK has really led the way. We saw this at COP26 in Glasgow, tail end of last year. The UK has really led the way in pushing for alternative energy production, moving away from gas, moving away from oil. The situation in Ukraine presents a unique and terrible additional emphasis to us collectively to move away from our addiction on hydrocarbons, and it's absolutely right we seek to do that because it's the right thing to do for the environment, and as we're now seeing, it denies Russia an incredibly important source of income that they rely upon to fund this war.
And in answer to my question?
Well, as I say, we have made it absolutely clear that we are looking ultimately to move away from hydrocarbons in the UK. We want long-term, economically and ecologically sustainable routes. Specific decisions on, specific means of energy generation is for the Energy Secretary. But ultimately, our direction of travel is to move away from hydrocarbons because, as I say, it's the right thing to do for the environment. It's the right thing to do economically. And in this particular situation with Ukraine, it's the right thing to do to deny Russia a means of funding its war effort.
We've got one of the heads of the fracking companies on a little bit later on, Quadrilla. They're looking at sealing their wells as early as today. Should they do it or should they wait?
Well, as I say, Kate, the individual decisions is a matter for the Energy Department, but the point that I've made is that our direction of travel in the UK is to move towards an economically, ecologically, and as we're saying with regard to Russia, a more diplomatically sustainable model of energy generation, and that is ultimately.
If you were him, would you seal the site today or not? Would you seal that well today or not if you were the head of Quadrilla?
To be honest with you, I'm focusing more with trying to bring the conflict in Ukraine to conclusion.
Prime Minister talking about it as the lead story in the Telegraph today.
I get the importance. I get the importance of securing energy in the short term. That is an incredibly important point, and the Prime Minister will be speaking to the international community to do that. Okay. But ultimately, as I have said, the real important thing for us to focus on is ultimately moving away from our addiction to hydrocarbons, because that is,
just a quick thought on Saudi Arabia before I let you go.
And ecologically, the right thing to do.
Just a quick thought on Saudi before I let you go. He is the Prime Minister heading to Saudi Arabia later on today. They killed 81 men over the weekend. We're always told that we bring up human rights with them every time we talk to them. It's not getting us very far, is it?
Well, I used to be the Minister for Middle East and North Africa. The UK has a long-standing and principled opposition to the use of the death penalty. That is a conversation that I have had with Saudi Arabia when I was in this role. I know my colleague Amanda Milling, who's taken over that role. She will have had conversations along those lines. Our position is absolutely clear. We think it is wrong as a response to criminal behaviour. That is our long-standing principal position. We will have communicated that to Saudi Arabia, and I have no doubt we will do in response to the executions that have been recently announced. OK, but we'll still do business with them. But sadly, we are out of time, so we'll have to pick that up again next time we chat, Mr Cleverly. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Quick look at the front pages for you now, most of which lead on the public's response to the Homes for Ukraine scheme. The Eye says thousands of British families have already signed up to host refugees. The Sun leads with the same story, saying 43,000 people have offered to take in those fleeing the conflict. That's also on the front of the Daily Mail. Carrying Britain's rush to join a new scheme is their headline. While the Times says the online registration site crashed shortly after it opened as people rushed to sign up. The National Ukrainian Army has released this footage showing soldiers firing from an armoured vehicle at Russian forces in Mariupol. The City Council said as of yesterday, 2,357 people have been killed in the besieged port city. Nick standing by for us in the Black Sea port of Odessa for us now. Hi, Nick. And we cannot underestimate how important Odessa is to both sides, can we?
No, it's hugely important. It is a massive port, strategically important. It's important to the economy. You have to see it as one of the sort of major ports in the Ukraine, and if the Russians take it, then they have control of the Black Sea, and that gives them a very strong hand. And we've been here for a few days now seeing how they're defending themselves. Other port cities to the east of here, like Mykolaiv, we visited yesterday, half the population has already run from there. 500,000 people usually live there. 250,000 people in just over a week have decided to leave, and that is because gradually the Russian military is encircling that port city, and it has been shelling and bombing there for the last few days. And when we went yesterday, we saw that there are still a lot of people who have not been able to leave or can't leave, can't afford to. Their families are there. We met a grandmother who was looking after her grandchildren because the parents worked in a local hospital, and they are just sort of hunkering down, trying to survive this. Elsewhere, yesterday was a bloody day in this war. The capital, Kiev, saw some really significant shelling. Artillery hit a 15-story apartment block, engulfing it in flames. One person died and many others were trapped. Our teams on the ground there reported that this apartment block, this residential complex, was nowhere near any military sites, which leads to the ever-growing conclusions that the Russian military are targeting civilians. We saw evidence of that in Mykolaiv yesterday. We were driving down a residential street where shells had landed on the roads, and all the windows of all the apartments had been blown out, and people are long gone from there. They dare not stick around. There was some hopeful news from that city yesterday. On our drive-in, we saw about 15 buses, all in a fast-moving convoy, packed with people. Thankfully, those probably women and children able to get out of there to Odessa. But as you said, Kay, they're going from one dangerous area to another. About 150 cars were able to be evacuated from Mariupol, a city that's been pounded there for nearly 2 weeks. So there are glimmers of hope as these humanitarian corridors are opened, that people, women and children, can get out of these cities. It's heartbreaking when you meet toddlers in a city that is being shelled, knowing that they cannot escape. So peace talks are continuing today, and a lot of that talk is trying to figure out whether humanitarian corridors can be opened and stay open so that people can get out of these dangerous places.
OK, for now, thanks a lot. Thanks, Nick. Well, despite the ongoing war in Ukraine, residents of Odessa are doing their best to keep spirits high as they prepare to defend their city from a Russian attack. Have a look at this. Amazing. And so they're taking the opportunity to join together through the medium of song. How lovely. Chelsea's football club's owner, Roman Abramovich, has been spotted in public for the first time since being sanctioned over his ties to Vladimir Putin. He was seen in the VIP lounge at Tel Aviv airport, where he departed for Istanbul on a private jet. It's thought the billionaire then flew to Moscow. Mr. Abramovich said last week he was selling the club, but the sale has been put on hold due to Chelsea operating under a special government licence and the Premier League disqualifying him as a club director. Still to come on the programme for you, we'll get the views of Labour's former Foreign Secretary Jack Straw on all sorts of things. We'll speak to two women who fled Ukraine and are now thousands of miles away in Ireland. What happened to them? And then after 8, we'll be joined by the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Lisa Nandy, very passionate in the House of Commons yesterday. You'll find out why at just after 8 o'clock. Meantime, China's dismissed claims by the United States that Russia has requested military equipment from Beijing as malicious misinformation. Let's find out more. Tom's standing by for us in Beijing, and I was just pressing the Foreign Minister for the UK on that very subject as well, Tom. And I'm not clear who's been communicating with China and what they've been saying.
OK, yeah, I mean, you didn't get an answer from the minister there. But we haven't had an answer from China. As you say, they dismissed this as malicious disinformation when it was reported in multiple media outlets. But when it was reported in those media outlets, what was reported was that Russia had requested aid from China, military and economic support. But we didn't know what China's response was. And there was a sense, perhaps, that the US and US intelligence was trying to get out ahead of this, to put pressure on China and its role in this Ukraine conflict. Because so far, China has been on the sidelines, and everyone's been wondering which way it will go, especially because of that deep friendship between Presidents Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, the president of China. They met here on the eve of the Olympics. They talked about a partnership that knew no limit. But I think we are finding out that there are some limits and where those limits lie. China rhetorically has firmly been in Russia's camp. It's been amplifying Russia's concerns. It's what it calls its legitimate security concerns. It has repeated false information about laboratories in Ukraine. It says the US are running. So in terms of what it's saying, it is certainly in Russia's camp, and it has not condemned Russia's invasion. It's refused to even call it an invasion. But in terms of actions, we haven't seen anything concrete there. And I think that's the key part of this. If China does intervene on Russia's side, we'll have effectively a proxy war in Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia fighting in the middle, but the West and China on either side. And that is a rather nightmarish scenario of a new Cold War. But China hasn't gone that far yet. It has blocked shipments of aircraft parts to Russia because it's worried about secondary sanctions. And China is itself dealing with a surge in COVID cases here. It doesn't want to jeopardize the economic environment any further. So far, it's been a wait-and-see approach. The thing that might change that is the close friendship between Putin and Xi Jinping. They share a worldview. They both think the dissolution of the Soviet Union was a terrible event for the world, and they're united in the belief that the West power is on the wane. I think recent events may have convinced both of those that the West is stronger than it first appeared, especially in terms of its response to Ukraine. But right now, Beijing really defined by inaction rather than anything else.
Just a quick thought on COVID before I let you go. I'm sure that you've seen that as of Friday, all of the remaining travel COVID restrictions in England, at least, are going to be gone. And yet, a very different story in some parts of where you are.
Yeah, OK, really different story. I mean, this has been fortress China when it comes to COVID. The borders have been sealed for a long time. And they have this zero COVID approach where if there's an outbreak, they try and stamp it out very quickly through mass testing and targeting lockdowns. But it's coming under a huge amount of strain. Now, the cases might not seem that high, 5,000 reported yesterday, but that is the highest it's been in 2 years. And the worry is the trajectory. They keep adding around 1,000 every day, and it's spread all over the country. So people are worrying whether this is the moment that Omicron breaks through China, and that can have serious effects for global supply chains as well. We've already seen some factories that produce iPhones shut down as a result of lockdowns happening, and there are millions of people under lockdown now. So it's a nervous moment for China. They're trying to beat back this recent wave of Omicron because they still have a low rate of vaccination, full vaccination amongst the elderly. People are getting nervous about this, and they are hunkering down for what might be a long time.
OK, Tom, for now, thank you. Other news for you this morning. And as I was saying, all travel restrictions in the UK are set to be removed completely, whether you're vaccinated or not. From Friday, no one entering the UK will need to take a COVID test or complete one of those passenger locator forms that takes forever. This will make the UK one of the first major economies to end all coronavirus travel rules. Talking to the travel editor of the Daily Telegraph, Claire Irving, coming up very shortly. Before that, let's take a look at these dramatic pictures from Amsterdam Schiphol Airport of a plane landing in heavy crosswinds. My goodness. Here we go.
Let's get a tight shot of the touch now, shall we? Because he's going to grease it. Oh, look. He's got a big smile on his face, look. Her face. Whoa! Whoa! No!
Nervous flyers, a very good morning to you, wherever you're watching this morning. He brought that cargo plane down, though, beautifully, didn't he? A Qatari pilot bringing down the aeroplane at Schiphol Airport in significant crosswinds. Apparently, they need to crab in sideways and flick it round at the end. Not for me, thank you. Rather sit here. Latest employment data for the UK has just been released. What is it saying? Helen Ann is here. Good morning.
Morning, Kay. So there's lots in there, statistics that tell us what's going on with jobs and wages, essentially. A few sort of top lines. Employment is up and unemployment's down. That's good. But actually digging deeper, there's a few other things going on that I think economists and the government will be quite worried about. Firstly, and importantly, wages and how importantly they compare to inflation. So for the second month in a row now, real wages are down compared to inflation, down a whole percentage point in the 3 months to January. So that's really, really significant and really worrying because we know inflation is very, very high. And essentially, if families get to the point where they feel that they can't spend their money out in the economy, that they can't afford to do so, that's when things get really worrying from an economic perspective, especially as we are still theoretically recovering from the pandemic. So that's a big problem, not least as well, because these are the figures for January. And we know that when the figures for February and March come through, when we start seeing the impacts in those numbers of the war in Ukraine, those huge increases in the price of oil, gas, grain, unfortunately, the situation's likely to get quite a bit worse. One other thing that's worth pulling out, we haven't spoken all that much about it in recent months. We did a lot in the summer, but vacancies, that huge labour shortage, quietly continuing to get along a lot worse. So for the first time, the number of vacancies in the economy up over 1,300,000. And that matters too, because if companies can't find workers, they have to put their wages up. They, in turn, have to put the prices of their goods up. That, in turn, feeds through to this big inflationary problem that we're all seeing and that mismatch between wages and inflation. So there's a lot of stuff going on that I think the government will be very worried about, that the Chancellor will be paying attention to in his spring statement next week. He's really going to want to be seen to do something for families.
OK, lovely. Thanks, Helen Ann. Thank you. And a reminder that our business presenter, Ian King, is back with a special episode of Ian King Live, looking at how the war in Ukraine is affecting the global economy. And that is tonight for you, actually, here on Sky News at 9 o'clock this evening. 9 o'clock this evening, special programme from our business presenter, Ian King Live, the global economy. Other news, Sir Lewis Hamilton has revealed he is in the process of adding his mother's surname as an additional middle name. It's understood the 7-time Formula One world champion, he was robbed of his 8th one, wasn't he? Will include Labra Lestier as a 3rd middle name, along with Carl and Davidson, rather than it becoming a double-barrelled surname. Sir Lewis said he really wants mum's name to continue on with the Hamilton name. And it's no more hard road for one rock icon who has taken it upon himself to fix some of the potholes that plague Britain's roads. Who are we talking about? Sir Rod Stewart donned a tracksuit and high-vis as he began repairing potholes close to his Harlow estate in Essex after complaining that they would damage his Ferrari. So he used to dig graves and now he's mending potholes just in case it damages the underneath of his Ferrari. He posted those pictures on Instagram. Still to come on the programme for you, explosions have been heard in Kiev just before sunrise as fighting continues too in the east of the country. The Ukrainian military released this footage of them striking a Russian tank as President Zelenskyy says progress in peace talks has been pretty good.
Российский премьер подчеркнул, надо усилить сотрудничество в рамках союзного государства.
And a Russian state TV employee is arrested after interrupting a live broadcast in protest against the war. Well, a short while ago, I asked the Foreign Office Minister, James Cleverly, whether China had condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine to the UK, following reports that Moscow had asked Beijing for help.
Well, we haven't had that statement from China. But what we are looking to do is ensure that China and indeed every other country around the world is condemning Russia's actions, absolutely not supporting Russia in its aggression against Ukraine, and indeed sanctioning Russia and putting real financial pressure on Russia. That's what we're calling on the international community to do, and that's what we'll continue to push for until this war comes to a conclusion, the Russian forces leave Ukraine.
Tamara's here. Good morning. What did you make of what Mr Cleverly had to say this morning?
Well, he didn't really go for China, which suggests that there may be talks going on behind the scenes, but he made clear that there have been no guarantees made by China about what its role is going to be. Could it potentially hold out the prospect of being a solution to this crisis? Could China be the only country to try and talk Vladimir Putin down, to try and get peace talks going in a meaningful way? I think that's what all the world is wondering. But certainly what we've seen from Joe Biden, rushing to Rome to have talks. There is great concern about what it could mean if the reports from US officials are correct, that Russia has asked China to give it weaponry to continue this war.
And that's important because it looks as though, in fact, Russian aides have acknowledged that the onslaught has stalled because they don't have enough equipment and they particularly need drones. The West is looking to China to say, don't you dare.
Absolutely, that's very much the message I think the US were giving. Don't do it. And yes, after weeks of saying it is all going to plan, although we could all see and the UK's intelligence assessments made clear that it wasn't. We've heard Sergei Lavrov raging in those press conferences saying, you don't know what the plan is, only we know what the plan is. But you've had senior people now in Russia expressing doubts about the way the war is going, about the huge losses of life that we assume are taking place, although no official numbers on those as yet. And if China was to enter the war on the side of Russia, as Tom Cheshire was setting out, be a huge call for them. It would effectively be a new Cold War. So these are the sorts of considerations at the moment. And of course, Boris Johnson is meeting a number of leaders of Nordic and Baltic countries today, countries like Estonia and Latvia. They're all in London having a meeting this morning, and they will be concerned about whether this conflict might spill over their borders from Russia, and whether the I do apologise about that.
That's okay.
My phone's got a mind of its own. But whether it could spill over into their borders, and obviously what that means.
Okay, I'm going to let you play with that phone. Obviously, there's something much more interesting than what I'm saying just at the moment. There we go. Don't worry about it. In fact, you should see a cartoon that is. We'll try and get it for you. A cartoon in the Times or the Telegraph today. I can't remember, and it's got Putin on a bear riding up to a dragon that's half sleeping.
Yes.
So let's see what happens.
That's the big concern.
Indeed.
And of course, Boris Johnson also talking about weaning ourselves off Russian energy today and what that will mean for people's household bills.
Talk about that in tomorrow's Take, won't we, at 9 o'clock? Looking forward to it. Thank you. Meantime, let's bring in the former Labour Foreign Secretary, should be Jack Straw. Hello to you, Mr Straw. Thanks for joining us. I did put it to Mr Cleverly about what we have said and what China might have said to us. Tell us how those back channels work, especially in a situation like this, when we are trying to get them to stay out of a war that could make the difference between tens of thousands of people dying and not.
In any acute situation, it's essential to have what you describe as a back channel, and are indeed called back channels. So those are confidential conversations between diplomats who are trusted on each side, and also have to trust each other. And typically, I mean, they take place completely away from scrutiny. I'll just give you one example. When President Obama wanted to re-establish some relationship with Iran, which led to the nuclear deal in 2015, there were 2 years of back-channel negotiations between American and Iranian officials, which were, quote, deniable, but which ensured that when they got to formal negotiations, they actually had more or less got it pre-cooked, as the saying goes in the diplomatic trade.
OK. What do you make of what you're hearing and the fact that China is saying, no, we're not involved at all, and how dare you suggest this? And the United States is saying, we can see what's going on. What role would you play if you were still the UK's Foreign Secretary? What would be happening behind the scenes?
Well, what I can see is that China has been looking at the situation. It has nothing particularly to thank the United States for. It's benefited hugely from the relaxation of trade restrictions which took place 30 years ago, but the United States and the West benefits as much as China does from China's trade. And China is a great nation. And one of the things about both China and these days Russia is this sense that these are nations which were humiliated by the West. In China's case, were humiliated. In Russia's case, are being humiliated as a result of the collapse of the Berlin Wall and all that's happened 30 years is on. So they don't really feel they owe the West anything. On the other hand, the Chinese, above all, are not stupid, far from it. And their prosperity does indeed depend on trade with the West, and only a tiny amount on trade with Russia, whose economy is so much smaller than it is China's. And of course, its population is so much smaller too. So the Chinese will be trying to work it out. And what I think they've now decided, or should have understood, is that this is a war that President Putin is not lost, but he's certainly not winning. And even if he does, quotes, win, it will be a Pyrrhic victory, which will be hollow. So that's what's going on there. The only, in my view, I mean, I think this is widely shared, the only man who could really push Putin into a corner, get him off this brutal, outrageous adventure of his, is the Chinese president. And that's, of course, important, for the West, for people like our Prime Minister and the United States President to push with the Chinese as well.
Yeah. Mr. Straw, we're very lucky to have you on today because, of course, foreign affairs very much dominating the news headlines. We're hearing that our Prime Minister is heading to Saudi Arabia later on today to talk about trying to source a different customer, a different client when it comes to oil, given the sanctions that we've got in place against Russia. But we know that the Saudis killed 81 people in one day on Saturday, or certainly this weekend. How can we do business with a country that we bring up their behaviour towards fellow human beings, and they continue to do it ever since your government was in power? Because, of course, you also did business with them. We did, and it's true across the world that you're faced with these moral hazards. So the answer is, how do you do business in practice? Well, with a peg on your nose. But here's the problem, and then there will be people saying, well, just refuse to take Saudi oil. I mean, let me just point out too, by the way, that Texas, the Lone Star state of the United States, it too executes a quite significant number of people, and with a very, very rickety criminal justice system, certainly compared to ours. So just point that out. And there is a relativism here. So when Iran, which kills more people judicially than any other country, executes people if they ever announce this, there's huge condemnation around the world. If it's Saudi Arabia, it's muted. And if it's Texas on the whole, people say nothing about it. Anyway, how do you do it? We need Saudi oil. I also just say, as the world's waking up, we also need Iranian oil, and we need Venezuelan oil. And so you will have to see, not these things put aside altogether, but frankly, twin track negotiations. But in the case of Saudi Arabia, Iran and Venezuela, for example, those countries need hard currency. They want to sell more oil at the highest price they can, and they won't mind at all about putting Russia's nose out of joint if they can take a greater market share of things than of the oil and gas markets than does Russia. So that's what happens. OK, just looking at the figures, actually, apparently Texas executed 6 people last year. I take your point, but it's significantly fewer, than what Saudi Arabia got up to just over this weekend. Let me ask you finally, if I may, about fracking. Your previous constituency, of course, up there in Lancashire, very much in the heart of fracking territory. Quadrilla has to decide whether to start capping those wells or not, given the situation that we found ourselves in. Should we cap those wells nonetheless, or should we wait?
It depends on the geology. I mean, I've never been opposed in principle to fracking, and I've seen it operate elsewhere. And it's not. I mean, there's a huge amount of talk about what it does. In other countries where fracking is taking place, it's been perfectly okay. The difficulty is the geology of that part of Lancashire. And it did lead to a number of, very minor earthquakes. But you talk about an earthquake, you think of buildings tumbling down. That happens, that there are many more natural earthquakes of that size than there have been caused by fracking. But nonetheless, you've got to understand it from the public's point of view, that there is real anxiety in that part of Lancashire about the geological effects and the effects on their own houses of fracking. So that's the issue for me. It's if you like, a practical one, rather than am I opposed in principle to fracking? Why should I be opposed in principle to fracking? It's another way of getting oil and gas out of the ground. And I'm very much in favour of all the climate change policies which my party is pursuing. But meanwhile, we need a lot of gas and oil.
We do. Former Foreign Secretary, we are out of time. It's always great to have you on the show. Do come back more often. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So, latest suggestions from the government, time and time again, is that the UK takes more refugees than any other country in Europe. Does it? We'll talk about it with an expert in a moment. But first, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, now one of the most recognisable world leaders, with his trademark army green shirt and unshaven look. And clearly this is rubbing off on other leaders, including the French President Emmanuel Macron has been spotted posing in a hoodie and jeans, a stark departure from his usual crisp suit and tie. The snaps show Monsieur Macron fielding calls from international leaders in Paris's Élysée Palace while bearing a striking resemblance to the Ukrainian leader. Anybody would think he was fighting an election campaign. Now, the exodus of refugees from Ukraine continues. Almost 3 million people have left the country so far. Joining us now is researcher at the University of Oxford's Migration Observatory, Peter Walsh. Hello to you, Mr. Walsh. I heard you on the radio just yesterday morning. I also have heard the Prime Minister many times from the dispatch box telling us that more refugees in Europe than anywhere else come to the United Kingdom. Is that true?
Well, he was quite cautious in the words he used, resettled refugees. So that's a technical term. Resettled refugees are those who are identified by the UN, typically in refugee camps around the world, and then transferred to participating countries. But actually, that is not the whole picture. Resettled refugees make up a relatively small share, about 5% of all those people who are given asylum-related protection in the UK and Europe. The rest, the 95%, well, those are people who actually have to come to the UK to apply for asylum. It's not possible to apply abroad. So they have to come to the UK, apply for asylum, and they are in much bigger numbers, both in the UK and in Europe. And when it comes to the regular asylum application process, the UK ranks about 5th or 6th when compared with the EU. So in the 5%, we're number 1, but actually much bigger numbers come through the regular asylum process.
What about per head of population? Where are we with that?
Yeah, so some people say actually it makes sense to adjust by population because population size, although it's a really crude measure, it gives some indication of a country's ability to provide refuge to people. And when you adjust for population, the UK falls well down the list when compared with the EU, coming in at about 20th place.
20th?
Yes, and that's when we take into account both the resettled refugees that the Prime Minister was talking about and all those asylum seekers who travel to the EU to claim asylum and are then granted status. 20th place.
So which countries in Europe should we be looking at? I mean, often we hear about Germany, but I've heard previously that Sweden does very well when it comes to looking after refugees.
It does, yeah. Sweden actually pips us into 6th or 5th place. Germany is 1st place, and it's about 10 times as many people it offers sanctuary to than the UK. And then there are other countries like Italy, like Greece, like Spain, like France. They're all ahead of us too, in absolute numbers. And then some of the smaller countries, of course, per unit population.
And I'm guessing also, just before I let you go, it's absolutely fascinating stuff. Turkey took an awful lot of Kurdish refugees, didn't they?
A very substantial number. It's actually estimated that there are more refugees in Turkey than any other country in the world. And the latest estimate, 4 million. So very considerable numbers in Turkey, although that's a country we don't really hear so much about.
Yeah, so what we have to remember is when the Prime Minister says we take in more refugees than any other country in Europe, that's true, but only if you add the word resettlement.
Yes, it is. It's that small subset of the total number of refugees to whom we give protection. It's those resettled refugees who are selected from camps by the UN and transferred to participating countries where on arrival they receive full refugee status.
See, that is absolutely fascinating stuff, isn't it? And I'm sure that our viewers have all learned something as a benefit of your knowledge this morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. It's all about the wording, all about the detail. My next guest travelled 4 days to flee the conflict in Kyiv, leaving their family behind. They're now living safely in Dublin. Ilada and Anastasia are with us now. Hello, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Hi. Hi.
Hi. Tell me the story. Tell me what happened.
Our story is that our homeland, Ukraine, as you know, nowadays is under attack of Russian bombs and rockets, and our native city, Kharkiv, currently is targeted by the enemy. And as you know, civilians are dying every day. Our families who stay in Kharkiv now, they are hiding in bomb shelters, an underground station to avoid Russian rockets and bombs, unfortunately.
So tell me what took you to Dublin particularly?
Sorry?
Tell me why particularly you went to Dublin.
Yeah, it happened by accident. Our way was long. We had left Kharkiv and traveled to Poland. Firstly, the journey to the Polish border took us nearly 4 days, but we didn't know where we could go next. And we were stuck in Poland, and we were in desperation because we couldn't find accommodation and a job in Poland. And we became stranded in Poland, and we had no idea, and that's why we decided to go back to Ukraine. And the fact that we are in Ireland now is just I don't know, a magic.
Okay. Now, Ilada, I know that you travelled together, you're related, aren't you? Anastasia is a child psychologist, and it was her work that particularly a young mum called, let me just check her name. Tell me about Oksana and what happened.
Oksana, it's a woman who helped us. Who helped us. Her little child, Stephanie, she was scared and she was stressed because of the war. And Oksana decided to find a child psychologist who might be able to give to her child some recommendation and consultation. And Oksana sent requests, as you know, to find some psychologist. And by the accident, Anastasia saw these requests, and Anastasia replied to her message, and they started to work with her little girl.
Okay. You know what, ladies? I'm so pleased that you're safe, and what a terrible journey that you have had. But hopefully you can start to build a new life in Dublin, safe in the knowledge that the British people are completely behind you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and we wanna thank Irish people. We are so grateful to Irish people for all the kindness and hospitality that they treat us with, and our Irish family who host us. In this family, we are surrounded by care, by attention. We could feel family warmth, and we really appreciate it. And we're attached to the bottom of our hearts.
That's lovely. Beautiful ladies, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you. Let's have a quick look at a couple of the pictures for you from this morning's papers. Just whiz through them for you very quickly. Daily Mail has this shot of what the night sky looks like from the outskirts of Kiev amid heavy Russian bombardment. The Telegraph has this dramatic picture of a wild horse in Colorado captured by a US-based Scottish photographer for this year's Sonny World Photographer Awards. And one more. Got time for one more? Here we go. The Times has this absolutely fantastic picture of a car that was renovated during lockdown. See you at 8.